There was a time before inflation, a time when money did not move, did not stretch, did not change. A coin was a coin. A value was a value. And for most of human history, the economy was frozen in place. In the ancient world, money wasn't an idea. It wasn't a policy. It was metal. A coin's worth came from its weight, not from a government's promise. Gold was gold. Silver was silver. Copper was copper. A farmer could bury his savings for 20 years, dig them up again, and find the same value staring back at him. There were no rising prices, no shrinking wages, no slow bleed through time. It was stability, but also stagnation. Because when money can't change, neither can society. Growth was slow. Trade was limited. A bad harvest meant hunger, not loans. A war meant plunder, not debt. Wealth didn't expand. It simply moved from one pair of hands to another. Every transaction was final, and every empire lived inside the limits of the metal it could mine. In this world, inflation didn't exist because money didn't lie yet. No king could create more gold without digging deeper into the earth. No emperor could fund a war without raising taxes or seizing treasure. The economy lived under the same rules as nature: fixed, finite, unforgiving. But stability has a weakness: ambition. As populations grew, armies expanded, and empires stretched across continents, rulers discovered a brutal truth. Their dreams were too big for the metal they controlled. They needed more money than reality allowed. And so the question emerged, quietly, dangerously: what if money didn't have to stay honest? The idea began as temptation, not theory. A coin with less silver spent just as well as a pure one, as long as people believed it did. A treasury filled faster with lighter coins. An army marched farther on diluted metal. The economy didn't need more mines. It needed more imagination. Inflation wasn't invented to help people. It was invented to help power escape its limits. Before inflation, the world was stable but small. After inflation, it would become richer, faster, and far more fragile. The first crack in the foundation of money was forming, long before Rome turned it into a system. Inflation didn't begin with economists. It began with kings, and a lie small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. In the early ancient world, money was pure metal. A coin was worth exactly what it weighed, no more, no less. But as kingdoms grew and wars multiplied, rulers faced a problem. Their ambitions demanded more money than their minds could ever produce. Gold didn't appear just because armies needed feeding. Silver didn't multiply just because palaces needed building. So someone, somewhere, history never recorded the name, discovered the first financial cheat code. If you melt a coin, mix in a little copper, and strike it again, it still looks like silver. The world's first inflation wasn't a policy. It was a trick, and it worked beautifully. Suddenly, kingdoms could mint twice as many coins with the same amount of metal. Soldiers were paid, roads were built, walls rose. The economy expanded in a way nature never allowed. The people didn't notice, not at first. A diluted coin spent the same as a pure one because the deception was invisible. But money is trust, and trust has a melting point. Soon, merchants realized their silver coins tarnished faster. Buyers noticed their savings felt lighter. Sellers raised prices to protect themselves. The first inflation didn't come from greed. It came from fear. Not fear that money would vanish, but fear that it wasn't what it appeared to be. That fear spread faster than the coins did. And once rulers saw this new power, they never stopped using it. Kingdom after kingdom copied the trick. Shaving, clipping, debasing. Every empire claimed it was temporary. Every empire swore it was for the public good. Every empire insisted the value hadn't changed. But the people felt the truth in their daily lives. Prices climbed. Savings shrank. Wealth evaporated between generations. The invention of inflation wasn't a financial evolution. It was a political revolution, a way for rulers to escape the limits of the natural world. Mining was slow. Manipulation was fast. Debasement was the moment humanity realized something dangerous. You don't need more wealth to fund an empire. You only need people who still believe in the coin you're destroying. And no civilization would embrace that lesson more ruthlessly than Rome. No empire exploited inflation more aggressively than Rome. And no empire paid a higher price for it. For 2 centuries, the Roman denarius was the most trusted currency on earth. A small silver coin that powered armies, trade routes, and an empire spanning continents. Roman money was legendary because it was simple. A denarius was pure silver, and Rome never broke its word. But empires don't stay simple. They grow hungry. Rome expanded until it reached the limits of geography. Deserts, mountains, and oceans that no army could conquer. The bigger the empire grew, the more money it needed. Roads, fortresses, grain, ships, salaries, all demanded a river of silver. And silver, like all things, has a limit. So emperors turned to the oldest trick in economic history: debasement. Under Nero, Rome reduced the silver content of the denarius for the first time. Just a little. Enough to mint more coins without alarming the public. But once the door was opened, every emperor afterward pushed it wider. Some out of necessity, some out of greed, some simply to survive the chaos of their reign. By the time of Emperor Caracalla, the denarius contained less than half the silver it once did. By the crisis years of the 3rd century, the coin was nothing more than a thin hope wrapped in metal. Inflation wasn't an accident. It was a policy, Rome's most destructive innovation. Prices doubled, then tripled. Soldiers demanded higher pay as their wages lost meaning. Merchants hoarded real silver and refused to accept debased coins. Ordinary citizens watched their savings evaporate with every new emperor. Trust in money, the invisible glue of civilization, began to crumble. And when money loses its memory, nations lose their minds. Rome spiraled into crisis: riots, famine, corruption, civil wars. The empire that once ran on discipline now ran on desperation. Every emperor printed more coins, believing he could outrun the collapse. But inflation is a debt to the future. And Rome's future couldn't pay. In the end, the denarius didn't just lose its value. It took the empire with it. Rome didn't fall in one night. It decayed one coin at a time. Because inflation wasn't just Rome's financial policy. It was Rome's slow-motion suicide. For centuries, a Roman coin could outlive the person who held it. A soldier could bury his pay, return decades later, and find the same value waiting for him in the soil. Money had memory, a promise carved into metal. But by the 3rd century, that promise was broken. Rome had printed away its honesty, and the world woke up inside an economy that no longer remembered what value meant. Prices didn't rise slowly. They spiked. What a family could once buy with a handful of denarii now took a bag. Savings evaporated like morning mist. People who had spent lifetimes accumulating wealth watched it disintegrate in a single season. Inflation wasn't just a financial event. It was a psychological one. Trust collapsed before the empire did. And trust is the foundation of everything. Not walls, not armies, not emperors. Trust. When merchants realized the coins in their hands were frauds, silver on the outside, scrap on the inside, they reacted the only way humans ever do. They raised prices. Then raised them again. Then stopped accepting money altogether. Barter returned. Gold returned. Hoarding returned. The empire slipped backward into a world it thought it had transcended. Meanwhile, soldiers, the backbone of Rome, demanded wages that matched reality. But reality was breaking apart. Emperors, desperate to stay in power, printed more worthless coins to buy loyalty. Each new batch of currency made the last batch even cheaper. It was inflation eating inflation, a financial snake swallowing its own tail. The people understood what the emperors didn't want to admit. Money had become a rumor, a story no one believed, and when money loses its meaning, society loses its stability. Crime surged. Tax collectors took goods instead of coins. Farmers fled their land rather than sell grain for worthless metal. The marketplace, once the beating heart of Rome, became a battlefield of suspicion and survival. Inflation didn't just raise prices. It erased the future. Because when money can't store value, neither can effort, discipline, or hope. Every action becomes short-term. Every decision becomes desperate. Civilization stops planning and starts reacting. Rome didn't collapse because it ran out of silver. It collapsed because it ran out of belief. The empire lost its coins long before it lost its borders. Because once money forgets what it's worth, people forget what they're fighting for. Rome fell, but its greatest invention survived. Not the aqueduct, not the road, not the legion. Its true legacy was something far more subtle, far more powerful. Inflation as a tool of the state. When the Roman denarius died, it didn't disappear. It evolved. Medieval kings learned quickly. When coffers ran empty, they didn't tighten their belts. They tightened their coins. They shaved silver from the edges, mixed gold with copper, stretched metal the way Rome once stretched truth. The result was always the same: more money for the ruler, less money for the ruled. What began as Rome's weakness became every empire's strategy. From the Byzantine solidus to the Ottoman akçe, from the French livre to the English pound, history became a recurring cycle of trust built, trust abused, trust destroyed. Rulers discovered that inflation wasn't just an economic phenomenon, it was a political weapon. It could fund wars too expensive to tax. It could pacify armies too large to pay. It could expand kingdoms too ambitious for their treasuries, all without ever asking permission. And as centuries passed, the trick grew more elegant. Coins gave way to paper. Paper gave way to credit. Credit gave way to digital entries on screens. The deception became so smooth that people forgot money had once been metal. Forgotten even that its value was once finite. Then came 1971, the moment the world left the gold standard behind, abandoning the last anchor tying money to reality. It was the final echo of Rome, a global agreement that currency could be whatever governments said it was, backed not by silver or gold, but by belief alone. And belief, as history teaches, is the most fragile metal of all. Today, inflation is framed as a mere percentage: 2%, 5%, 9%. A metric, not a warning. But behind every number lies the same ancient pattern: power stretching value until it tears. Governments have replaced emperors, but their temptations remain identical. When budgets swell and crises hit, they reach not for solutions, but for the printing press. Rome didn't invent inflation because it wanted destruction. It invented inflation because it wanted time. Time to fight, time to rule, time to survive. That is the legacy of the broken coin, a reminder that inflation is never an accident. It's an inheritance. Today, we treat inflation like the weather, something that just happens, something natural, unavoidable, inevitable. But inflation isn't nature. It's design. Every modern economy is built on a silent agreement. Your money will lose value every year, not by accident, not by mismanagement, but by intention. What Rome did out of desperation, modern governments do by policy. We call it stimulus. We call it economic growth. We call it healthy inflation. But behind the terminology lies an ancient truth. Inflation is the tax you never voted for. Central banks print money not because the economy demands it, but because the system depends on it. A world without inflation would reward saving, slow spending, and freeze the gears of consumption. Modern society cannot afford that kind of stability, so it engineers instability instead. Every year, your dollars buy a little less. Every decade, your savings shrink in silence. And yet, the system calls this success, because inflation doesn't punish everyone equally. It punishes the cautious. It punishes the saver. It punishes the worker who trades time for wages, while the wealthy protect themselves with assets that rise faster than prices. Inflation is not a glitch. It's an algorithm. It's how governments fund debts too large to pay honestly. It's how nations fight wars without raising taxes. It's how leaders buy time without earning trust. Rome used inflation to stretch silver. Modern governments use it to stretch reality. And just like Rome, we pretend the consequences aren't real. But the signs are all around us. Shrinking paychecks, rising prices, housing that drifts out of reach, a middle class sinking quietly into the cracks. People work more, earn more, and end the year with less. Inflation isn't just an economic force, it's a psychological one. It teaches people that the future is worth less than the present, that saving is foolish, that planning is naive. It turns society into a treadmill, always running, never arriving. The world tells us inflation is normal, but history tells us something else. It was invented, engineered, to serve the powerful at the expense of the patient. Because inflation didn't begin as a law of nature. It began as a strategy, Rome's strategy, and we're still living in its shadow.